I used to work at a hotel that is part of a very large hotel chain. The management at my hotel, as well as more senior management, was all about nepotism. If you were related to or friends with someone in upper management, then you had some amazing career prospects ahead. We got a new food and beverage manager who was a golf buddy of the general manager and the executive chef. We'll call him Houston. Houston had previously managed a number of top restaurants in the city, including a Michelin star restaurant. Strangely, though, he seemed to change jobs every 6 to 12 months. We soon found out why. The position he moved into oversaw 3 F&B departments with around 300 staff all up. Very quickly, we found that as well as not realizing that we weren't fine dining, Houston was the most horrible pig of a man that I've ever had to work with. He was a very tall, large man who would use his size to physically intimidate other staff and managers. He would shout at anyone for any perceived mistake, real or imagined, that he saw. He was very handsy and often made seedy comments to the attractive young waitresses. Management would often attend events and eat and drink with guests while also making sure nothing went wrong. At one of these events, he got one of the young women in sales so drunk an ambulance had to be called and she had her stomach pumped. He was just a horrible human being. As you can imagine, everyone from kitchen staff to waiters to managers were making complaints about him. I know that one manager had gone over the head of our general manager and was slowly elevating the issue to higher and higher levels of management, heading towards national level. The response that our HR department was sticking to was that Houston had been hired to shake things up. Apparently, they had expected a certain amount of friction to occur and had essentially been told to ignore any complaints that came their way. They had taken things through the proper channels and followed the correct procedure. There was nothing they could do. Their hands were tied. Enter our story's hero. So the bar in this hotel was well run by a short Filipino man. We'll call him Joan. Because there were rarely any real issues at the bar, John had mostly been left alone by Houston. John had never seen Houston's bad side come out and never personally had a problem with him. One day, an issue did come up with the bar. It eventually turned out to be a management miscommunication, which was a very common thing. Thanks, management, but that was irrelevant at the time. So Houston decides that the problem is Joan's fault, storms into the bar, and while Joan is serving and in front of staff, customers, and a supervisor, Houston absolutely lays into Joan, just like he has to every other supervisor and manager in his department already. What the heck happened yesterday? A group complained to me this morning that we hadn't charged their account properly. Sort this out and do your job properly next time. And picture this with a large 6-foot-tall man getting right in the face of a 5-foot-tall Filipino while yelling abuse at absolutely the top of his voice. Houston stormed back to his office. John didn't take anyone's nonsense, and he followed Houston back to his office while they shouted at each other in front of even more staff, supervisors, and another manager. Houston obviously didn't back down or apologize because this is how he had operated for the last 6 months without any consequences. John went straight up to HR and told them exactly what had happened, and as usual, they told him there was nothing they could do. That seemed like it was going to be the end of it. That night, John went home and got some legal advice from a friend. Following the advice, he typed up an objective account of exactly what had happened and included names of all staff who had witnessed the encounter. This showed how many people there were able to confirm his story. He emailed this to the entire management team, including team leaders, supervisors, and other departments, as well as each person in HR. This eliminated deniability in anyone's account, as well as keeping the whole hotel in the loop of what was going on. The next day, John took his written account down to the police station to file charges of workplace assault. He received a document from the police to confirm that he had filed charges. He then sent that document to the same mailing list of management and HR. By the time he arrived at work that afternoon, the GM had started an inquiry into the issue that he had previously been completely unaware of. HR was claiming that they had no idea what had been going on either. This was definitely the first they were hearing of problems with Houston. Over the next few days, Everyone in the F&B department from team leader up was called into a meeting to discuss their experiences with Houston. At the end of the week, Houston was notified that he was to attend a meeting with the upper management and HR teams the next day. The next day came and Houston went into his office, packed up his things, walked into the meeting and slammed his note of resignation onto the desk. HR agreed to an immediate termination of his contract, and he walked out of the job that afternoon. After he left my hotel, he got a job at a small, very average Mexican restaurant as a sommelier. He lasted about 3 months there. It was a quiet day in the neighborhood, and I decided to take a stroll around the block to clear my head. As I walked, I noticed a commotion a few houses down. As I got closer, I realized it was my neighbor, Karen, yelling at the mailman. Now, Karen is no ordinary neighbor. She's the epitome of entitled parents, and she always finds something to complain about. I tried to avoid her as much as possible, but this time I couldn't help but get involved. "Excuse me, Karen, what's going on here?" I asked, trying to diffuse the situation. "This incompetent mailman can't seem to deliver my package on time," she said, her face turning red with anger. "I ordered it 2 days ago, and it still hasn't arrived." "Maybe there was a delay or something," I said, trying to reason with her. "I don't care about your excuses," she snapped. "I want my package, and I want it now." At this point, I knew there was no reasoning with her. Karen was always like this, demanding things and treating people like they were beneath her. I decided to step in and help the mailman, who looked visibly shaken by Karen's outburst. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the inconvenience," the mailman said, his voice trembling. "I'll try my best to deliver your package as soon as possible." "You better do," Karen said, glaring at him. I could see that the mailman was in a difficult position, and I didn't want to leave him alone with Karen, so I decided to accompany him to his next stop and help him out with his deliveries. As we walked, I learned more about the mailman, whose name was Mike. He was a kind man who had been working for the post office for over 20 years. Mike told me that he had been dealing with entitled parents like Karen for years, and it never got any easier. He said that he had to deal with angry customers almost every day, and it was starting to take a toll on it. I listened to Mike's story and felt sorry for him. I knew how it felt to deal with entitled parents, and it was never a pleasant experience. As we approached Karen's house, I braced myself for another confrontation. Sure enough, Karen was waiting outside her house, tapping her foot impatiently. When she saw us, she rushed over and demanded her package. "Where is it? I've been waiting all day," she said, her voice rising. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we haven't received it yet," Mike said, trying to calm her down. "That's not good enough," Karen said, her face turning red with anger. "I want my package, and I want it now." I could see that Mike was starting to lose his patience, and I decided to step in before things got out of hand. "Karen, can I talk to you for a second?" I said, grabbing her by the arm. "What do you want?" she said, shaking me off. "I just want to talk to you for a second," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I think you're being a bit unreasonable." "Unreasonable. I ordered something, and I want it delivered," she said, her voice rising. "I understand that, but you don't have to yell at the mailman," I said, trying to reason with her. "He's just doing his job." Karen scoffed at me and rolled her eyes. "I don't have time for your lectures," she said, turning to Mike. "Where's my package?" At this point, I knew there was no reasoning with Karen. Karen's behavior was getting out of hand, and I could see that she was starting to get violent. She started grabbing at my arm, trying to pull me away from Mike. I could feel my blood boiling, and I knew that I had to do something to protect myself. "Karen, let go of me," I said, trying to shake her off. "No, you're not going anywhere until I get my package," she said, tightening her grip. That was it. I had had enough of her entitlement and her aggressive behavior. I quickly pulled my arm away from her grip and pushed her back. Karen stumbled backward, her eyes wide with shock. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she said, her face contorted with anger. "I think you need to calm down and stop acting like a child," I said, my voice rising. Karen was fuming now, and I could see that she was about to lunge at me. But before she could make a move, I punched her in the face. It was a split, split-second decision, but it was the only thing I could do to protect myself. Karen stumbled backward, her hands clutching her face in pain. I could see the shock and disbelief on her face as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. You hit me, she said, her voice trembling. I had to, I said, my voice calm but firm. You were getting violent, and I had to protect myself. Karen didn't say anything else. She just stood there, her face red with anger and her eyes filled with tears. I could tell that she was humiliated and embarrassed, and part of me felt sorry for her. But another part of me was proud of myself for standing up to her and not letting her get away with her entitled behavior. I'm 27, female, and I live in a rather nice neighborhood near the middle. My neighbor, who we'll call EM for entitled mother, has a large dog and a rather destructive son, who we'll call EK for entitled kid. I have a pretty good financial situation, and I live alone because the house was passed down to me in the will. It's a pretty big yard compared to Karen's yard, which is almost half the size. I have no gate for the yard, leaving it open for any pets animals to come right in. I work from 7 a.m., 5 p.m., so I'm gone for a long while during the day. Karen is the type to do a lot of gardening, so she doesn't like EK in the yard with all the tools. One day, she asked me if I would allow her son to play in my yard while I was at work. It couldn't cause any harm, could it? I accepted, but I did tell her that her son would have to be gone by the time I was back, and all went well until I got my first cat. Keep in mind, EK would always bring the dog over with him to play. I named my new Ginger cat. Well, Ginger. Ginger loved to bask out in the sun with the EKN dog until one day I found that she wasn't outside. In fact, she was inside with a bite mark. I rushed her to the vet immediately, where she was treated and wore some sort of bandage wrap around her waist for the next week or so. I checked the cameras only to see EK trying to move Ginger out of her general spot so that he could sit there, and she swiped at him, scaring him off. It seemed that EK's dog did not take kindly to this, and the mark was not a bite mark, but a swipe from the dog. I presented this info with Karen, who denied it and said he's just a kid and Guinea is fine. I reminded her that it was Ginger, then told her that neither her son or dog were allowed on my property again. She threw an absolute tantrum and told me that they should be entitled to the yard while I was away because, after all, you can't just let it go to waste. I then reassured her of my decision, to where she said word for word, "Ma'am, you need to leave. I'm so confused. I'm considering my options, and I think small claims court is a bit too much for this. What am I supposed to do?" I was reminded of this story while browsing today. It happened a few years back. At my local amusement park, one of the roller coasters has a height requirement of around 54 inches or 137 centimeters for the non-Americans, and if anyone is below that limit, they can't ride. Standard safety measures that should be completely obvious to anyone that isn't entitled. I was in line right behind the entitled parents waiting to ride when it all played out. The entitled parents boarded the coaster with their daughter, who was clearly below the height limit, probably a good couple of inches below. So when they sat down, the staff manning the coaster came up to them and told them she couldn't ride. Of course, being entitled, they began arguing with the staff while the daughter just sat there looking either confused or miserable. After losing the argument, instead of getting off with their daughter, the entitled parents left her with a complete stranger and rode the ride by themselves. They also had delayed the coaster launch because of their argument, so there's that as well. It's wild to me that people like this really exist. Who leaves their kid in hypothetical danger for a roller coaster?